Here I am, brain the size of a planet, and they ask me to take you up to the bridge. Call that job satisfaction, because I don't.
So viewers of this channel may remember my review of the initial offerings of Spektrum Smart Technology series of batteries, and of course their chargers as well. And I was quite intrigued by how it all worked, and I thought it was great for maintaining battery health and extending their lifespan. Well, now Spektrum has introduced their Generation 2, AKG2 series of batteries and chargers. And they've made a couple of surprising changes. Is this the next generation of battery tech? Well, let's find out. With G2 comes a new series of chargers including the S1400, a 400 watt single output AC power charger. The charger is fairly compact but feels quite stout, indicating it's jam-packed with electronics inside. It still has a standard balance port, IC3 port, and what I mistakenly thought was a connector plug until I realized it was a slide cover exposing a larger IC5 port. On the side are USB ports for firmware updates and a regular one for charging devices. Power switch, decorated fan exhaust, and power cord connector on the rear. Corners have this rubber non-slip covering, which is also on the buttons. Power up is greeted with a splash screen while it boots up. Once booted, there is a simple display waiting for you to plug something into it or push the menu button, whichever comes first. I elected to push the button, which takes a couple of seconds of holding it down to change the menu of options. Once in, you have lots of basic options like selecting charge, discharge, or storage modes. Battery chemistry type, which has all the commonly known types, though interestingly, nickel cadmium is not an option, though nickel metal hydride setting will generally work for NiCads. For lithium cell count selection, you have the option of 1S to 6S. Default charge current, which goes from 0.1 amps to a max of 20 amps. Further down the menu is the charger history logs, which being a new charger has no history. Interesting that it shows the internal DC voltage input. In system settings, mostly cosmetic options to the user interface, though you can pull up firmware versions and even run a built-in self-test. Not 4, but 5 different language options. Some sound options. And adjustable backlight brightness. Okay, so let's take a look at the new G2 batteries. The first thing you see here is there's no balance plug, just a single IC3 connector. We're all used to using the balance connector for charging and checking voltage levels, but what about the G2 batteries? Well, the single smart connector has a third data lead that transmits detailed battery information to smart devices like this smart checker, or as you'll see shortly, the smart charger. Speaking of chargers, the S1400 charger is fully backward compatible with balance connector equipped batteries. A few seconds after plugging in the battery, the charger automatically starts the charging process with a nice bar graph display. Pressing the down button cycles through individual cell voltages and internal cell resistances. Now for the G2 batteries, you just plug in a single smart connector for the charger to start the charge sequence automatically. You can also press the back button to start the charging process. This now enables the menus to check the log files within the battery memory or faults and other data. Individual cell voltage is still there, but that data is now only sent through the smart connector. Going into the battery settings, the same battery options are available. Now I like to lower the charge cutoff voltage to 4.1 volts to prolong battery life. What's nice is the G2 batteries come with the auto storage feature already enabled from the factory, which you can disable or even max out to 240 hours. Something I forgot to mention in my last Smart Tech video is that you can use the XBC100 Smart Checker to change the default battery settings with a long press of the center button. There's also work with the G2 batteries with no firmware update needed. Now, I was able to get a couple of different G2 packs, and including this hard case version, which I presume is for RC car applications like rock crawlers and such, but I will be using it in an aircraft. And based on what I see in the Horizon Hobby product page, there will be lots more choices for G2 batteries in the next few months. Now, I wanted to stress test the charger a bit, so I took the hard case 2-cell pack, which says right on the label it will handle 25 amps charge rate. So the first thing to do was go into the current settings and crank up the charge current to 20 amps. As the charge current ramps up, at some point the rear fan will kick in to help vacate the excess heat. And there we go, 20 amps charge rate. Since I wasn't going to immediately use the charged pack, it's time to use the storage feature, which will automatically charge, or in this case, discharge the battery down to a roughly half-charged state. The max discharge rate seems to be at 1.5 amps. I was curious what the max charge rate would be with a 6-cell battery, so I whipped out my big 6S 7000 mAh battery pack. With the charger set to 20 amps, the max it would do is just over 17 amps. Which is quite reasonable, as that is about 390 watts, or just 10 watts shy of the charger's maximum power rating. One last curiosity is if the G2 batteries could be charged with an off-brand charger. Now, in order to do so, you have to turn off the cell balancing and manually set the cell count. Once that is done, the G2 packs charge just fine in this bulk charge mode. Of course, you have to be very careful to select the right cell count, and there is no safety cutoff if a cell exceeds 4.2 volts. My first generation smart charger is similar when you plug in a G2 battery. It will charge it, but after a mild protest prompt first. Fortunately, there is a firmware update with the use of an adapter cable. It's a USB cable adapter for your PC. Navigate to the Spektrum page for your charger and download the G2 update under the Support tab documentation link. The update will specifically say G2 UI and will be ready for the charger to be connected. For this S2100, it is a headphone-like jack, but other models may be a USB port. The software automatically detects the charger, at which point you can now click on the update buttons. After the charger is updated, it will reboot with an updated display, much like the G2 charger. At first, it didn't recognize the battery correctly when I attempted a charge. But after power cycling the charger, it worked as expected by auto-charging the G2 battery once plugged in. So be sure to power cycle the charger after updating the firmware. And looking at the battery settings, shows all data loaded successfully.
One last thing, I tested the USB output with my cell phone, and it seemed to be a fairly powerful port based on how fast it charged up my phone.
It's funny that what's old is now new again. Well, sort of. So this is actually a very old lithium pack that for some reason I never used, but you'll notice that it does not have a balanced plug. But it's very much a dumb battery, and if you didn't set your charger correctly, you could easily start a fire, and unfortunately many did back in the old days. Now I have to say, it's a little weird not having to plug in a balanced plug, but I could get used to it. And I've had balanced plugs fail, even go wonky on me, so one less failure mode is quite nice actually. Plus it's less wires to shove into a small aircraft. Now one thing that came to mind to me is how do you rebalance the battery if they happen to get out of balance? And I don't see that happening with the correct charger, but if you are using an off-brand charger, it looks like it will just have to let the battery sit for a few days, and it will eventually balance itself as it auto discharges to a storage voltage. Now the hard case pack may be primarily for cars, but they work great for large-scale gas aircraft, for flight packs. They're my new favorite pack, in fact, for giant-scale model ignition and high-voltage servo batteries, as they can cram in a lot of capacity in a quite durable case. Now lastly, the S1400 charger really lets you pour the coals while charging. Even a 6S packs can be fast charged off of a normal house current, which I think is pretty impressive, especially considering the compact size of the charger. So I do think this technology has an expanded future in our hobby.
I'm just a menial robot. Oh well. They drive me crazy with their Marvin, close the door. Well, isn't